The scrape of glass echoed in the lab. A student's hand closed around his professor's throat. For a heartbeat, he believed he held the power, but what followed would rattle the entire campus. To understand how it all happened, we need to go back to the first day of the semester, when a professor walked into her lab and a student decided to test her. It was Dr. Ivor Morgan's second semester teaching biochemistry at Lakeside College. But the lab already felt like home. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal, every counter lined with beakers and glassware that gleamed beneath fluorescent lights. Students shuffled in, white coats crisp, goggles adjusted, voices hushed with nervous energy. For most, this was the beginning of discovery. For Ivor, it was the culmination of years of proving she belonged in spaces that once doubted her. At 36, Ivor carried herself with calm precision. She had grown up in a small town where brilliance was often buried beneath prejudice. The military had honed her further discipline, resilience, decisiveness. But her students didn't know that. Here, she was simply Professor Morgan, keeper of order and knowledge. Among her class sat Tyler Hayes, a senior biochemistry major with sharp grades and sharper arrogance. Rumors trailed him, inherited wealth, family influence, and a quiet conviction that the world was already his. From the first week, his contempt simmered in every eye roll, every muttered aside. When she lectured on enzyme kinetics, he scoffed under his breath. Ivor paused, fixing him with calm eyes. Would you care to explain the catalytic mechanism to the class, Mr. Hayes? The room stilled. Tyler fumbled, stuttered, then went silent. She moved on without humiliation, but the message was clear. She saw him, and that stung more than any rebuke. From that moment, something shifted. Tyler wasn't used to being checked, especially not by a black woman. The seed of resentment took root, watered by entitlement. Ivor didn't dwell on it. She had seen men like him before, in uniforms and boardrooms alike, but the tension grew, thread by thread, toward the inevitable snap. Weeks later, Ivor scheduled one of the semester's most complex experiments, catalase, breaking down hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen. Safety mattered more than brilliance here. Goggles, gloves, and strict adherence to instruction were non-negotiable. Only those who follow every safety protocol will lead today's groups. Ivor reminded them, scanning the room. Science requires discipline as much as intelligence. Most students nodded, careful and deliberate. Tyler didn't. He plunged ahead, pipetting reagents before she'd finished her instructions. Mr. Hayes, she said firmly. Pause. The pipette belongs back in the rack until you're ready. Safety isn't optional. If you can't follow instructions, you can leave my lab. Heat flared across his face, pride burning in public view. He wasn't used to rules applying to him. His gloves slapped against the bench as he tore them off, the snap of latex echoing louder than expected. He strode forward, anger sharpening his features. You think you're tough, huh? His voice dripped with venom. Just because they gave you a job? The words hung heavy, and before anyone could react, he lunged. His hand clamped around her throat, squeezing, trying to drag her down to fear. Gasps filled the lab. Students froze, paralyzed between terror and disbelief. But Ivor didn't freeze. Her body moved before thought could catch her. Instinct honed long before this classroom. She seized his wrist, pivoted, and locked his arm in a joint hold that stole his strength. A swift twist of her hips, and he was face down on the lab bench, pinned with a force he couldn't wriggle against. Let go of me, he snarled, muffled against the cold surface. Her voice was steady, almost calm. Congratulations, Mr. Hayes, you just tested the wrong veteran, and your first real consequence starts now. The class stared in shock. The authority she'd commanded before now deepened into awe. Security arrived within minutes. Tyler's protests dissolved the moment. The body camera footage from the lab was replayed. Witnesses confirmed everything. The aggression, the grab, the clean, decisive defense. He was handcuffed and escorted out, his once untouchable arrogance reduced to a pathetic scowl. Word spread fast. Within a day, Tyler Hayes was expelled. His family's money couldn't shield him from the viral video now circulating across campus. The headline was everywhere. Racist student assaults professor. Gets humbled by veteran. Comments poured in, some praising Dr. Morgan's composure, others dissecting the bigger lesson. But for Ivor, it wasn't about headlines. When she walked into the lab the next week, silence fell, not out of fear, but respect. Students sat straighter, listened closer. They had seen what strength looked like. Not brute force, but calm, disciplined resolve. That evening, she reflected alone. Strength, she thought, wasn't in domination. It was in restraint. She had ended the danger without cruelty, asserted power without humiliation. She hadn't needed to prove herself. But when the moment came, she did. Tyler's mistake had been more than arrogance. It was blindness. He had seen only what he wanted. A woman to belittle, a black professor to undermine. What he never saw was the history in her bones. The soldier who had carried comrades through firefights. The daughter who had endured prejudice. The scholar who had carved space in a world that doubted her. As dusk settled over campus, Avor stood at her window, watching students hurry across the quad. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. Her story had spread. Yes, but what mattered was the quieter lesson her students carried. Fear isn't power. Silence isn't weakness. And sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the one that commands the storm. The scrape of glass had started it. Now, in her lab, silence itself had become her authority.